The cabin was supposed to be about silence. I'd come here to escape the drone of the city, the incessant hum of expectation that had followed me since my last book had done moderately well. I needed to write the next one, but the words were gone, replaced by a low-grade static in my brain. So I'd rented a place in the middle of nowhere, a small wooden box surrounded by pine trees and the indifferent gaze of the mountains. For 2 weeks, the silence had been perfect. It had also been suffocating. My life had become a study in quiet desperation. I would wake up, make coffee, stare at a blank screen for 8 hours, and then drink just enough whiskey to blur the edges of my own failure. The loneliness was a physical presence, a cold spot in the bed next to me. I was an observer by trade, a novelist, but I had become a passive observer of my own life, watching it unspool in a series of identical, meaningless days. Then the water heater broke. It died with a sad, gurgling sigh, leaving me with nothing but ice-cold water and a new, more immediate problem to fixate on. I called the number for the property owner listed on the fridge. A low voice answered on the second ring, a gravelly sound like stones rolling downhill. He said his name was Cole, and he'd be over in an hour. An hour later, a dusty blue truck rumbled up the gravel drive. Cole unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was taller than I'd expected, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his worn flannel shirt. His hair was the color of dark honey, and his face was all quiet angles and a steady, unreadable expression. He didn't smile, just gave a short, assessing nod. "Water heater?" he asked. His voice was even lower in person, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my own chest. "In the crawl space," I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. I spent the next 2 hours watching him work. I pretended to be busy at my laptop, but my focus was entirely on the man folded into the cramped space under my floor. I watched the methodical movement of his hands, the confident way he handled his tools. His hands were calloused and capable, the knuckles slightly scarred. There was an economy to his every motion, nothing wasted. The scent of him drifted up from the crawl space, a clean, earthy smell of sawdust, metal, and something uniquely his, like fresh air and faint, masculine soap. I found myself tracking the flex of muscle in his forearm as he tightened a bolt, the line of his jaw as he concentrated. He finished the job just as the sun began to dip below the ridgeline, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. He emerged from the crawl space, wiping his hands on a rag, leaving a faint smudge of grease on his cheek. "Should be good to go," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were a deep, startling green, the color of moss in the shade. That steady gaze held me for a beat too long, and I felt a strange, unfamiliar flutter in my stomach. It was the first interesting thing I had felt in months. "Thank you," I managed. I owe you. It's part of the rental," he said, but the corner of his mouth ticked up in something that wasn't quite a smile, but was close enough to make my breath catch. A mischievous flicker in those serious eyes. "Just try not to break anything else for a week or 2. He left, and the cabin was silent again. But this time, it was different. The silence was filled with the ghost of his presence, the lingering scent of his work, the memory of his low voice, the echo of that almost smile. I went to bed that night and dreamed of steady green eyes and capable hands. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. 3 days later, a fuse blew, taking out the kitchen lights. I tried to fix it myself, fumbling in the dark with the breaker box, feeling utterly useless. Defeated, I called Cole. "Leo," he said, his voice laced with a dry amusement that made my face heat. "Breaking things again. It wasn't my fault this time," I grumbled, but there was no real heat in it. A part of me, a part one refused to examine too closely, was embarrassingly glad for the excuse to see him again. He arrived as dusk was settling, and the cabin was cast in long, deep shadows. He fixed the fuse in under 5 minutes, his large frame making my small kitchen feel even smaller. He moved around the space with a quiet confidence that I envied. I stood by the counter, trying to look casual, trying not to stare. "You're all set," he said, closing the breaker panel with a decisive click. He turned, and we were closer than I'd realized. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way a few strands of his hair fell across his forehead. My heart began a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. "Right. Thanks," Again, I said, my internal monologue screaming at me to be less awkward. He didn't move. His gaze dropped to my mouth for a fraction of a second, a glance so quick I thought I might have imagined it. But then his eyes came back to mine, and the air between us grew thick and heavy. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. What is he thinking? Is he seeing the same strange current that I'm feeling? Or am I just a lonely writer projecting fantasies onto the handsome handyman? The thought was mortifying. "You cook?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. The question was so out of left field it took me a second to process. Sometimes. Badly. That ghost of a smile appeared again, a little more definite this time. "I can tell. Your fridge is just beer and a sad-looking lemon." I flushed. "I've been busy." Staring at a blank page isn't busy, Leo. The perception of it, the casual accuracy, hit me like a physical blow. He saw right through me. He saw the fraud, the writer who couldn't write. But there was no judgment in his tone, only a quiet statement of fact. He reached past me to tap the cover of the novel I'd left on the counter, one of my own. His fingers brushed against my arm as he pulled back, a brief, electric touch that sent a jolt straight through me. It was nothing. It was everything. "This is good," he said, nodding at the book. "Read it a couple years ago." The ending was abrupt. I stared at him, dumbfounded. He'd read my book. The stoic, quiet mountain man who fixed my plumbing had read my book. "You read?" I asked, instantly cringing at how condescending it sounded. He just raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching. "When I'm not fixing things for city guys who can't handle a breaker box." "Yeah, I read." The banter was easy, but underneath it, something else was happening. He was watching me, really watching me. It wasn't the polite, disinterested gaze of a stranger. It was focused, intentional. My mind raced, trying to analyze it, to categorize it. Was it curiosity? Pity? Or was it the same humming awareness that was currently making it hard for me to breathe? He stayed for another hour. He never sat down, just leaned against the counter while I, feeling strangely like I was being interviewed, told him about the book I was supposed to be writing. I talked more than I had in weeks. He was a phenomenal listener, his stillness drawing the words out of me. He'd just nod, his green eyes fixed on my face, and that quiet attention made me feel more seen than I had in years. When he finally left, the silence he left behind was charged. I walked through the cabin, the air still seeming to hold the shape of him. I touched the spot on the counter where he'd leaned. I replayed the moment his fingers had brushed my arm. It was such a small thing, a meaningless, accidental contact. But my skin still burned where he'd touched me. I was in trouble. Deep, deep trouble. The next week was a slow burn torture of my own making. There were no more broken appliances. No more excuses for him to come over. But I saw him. I'd sit at my desk, pretending to work, and my eyes would invariably drift to the window. I'd see him splitting wood across the property, the axe rising and falling in a powerful, hypnotic rhythm. I'd watch him repairing a fence line, his movements patient and sure. He became the protagonist of my daydreams. I learned the way he moved, the set of his shoulders when he was concentrating, the way he'd push his hair back from his forehead with the back of his wrist. He never seemed to notice me watching. Or if he did, he gave no sign. This distance was excruciating. I was back to being an observer, but now my subject had a name and a face and a low, rumbling voice that haunted my thoughts. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I poured 2 glasses of iced tea, my hand shaking slightly, and walked across the meadow toward him. It felt like the longest walk of my life. He was sharpening the blade of a mower, a file moving in smooth, steady strokes against the metal. The sound was sharp and rhythmic. He looked up as I approached, his hand stilling. He squinted against the sun, his expression unreadable as always. "Thought you might be thirsty," I said, my voice tight. I held out a glass. He looked from the glass to my face, and for a moment, I was sure he would refuse, that he'd see the pathetic, desperate loneliness behind the gesture. But then he wiped his hands on his jeans and took the glass, his fingers brushing mine. This time, I knew it wasn't an accident. His touch lingered for a fraction of a second, a deliberate pressure that sent a shockwave up my arm. "Thanks," he said, his voice rough. He took a long drink, his throat working. I watched the line of his neck, the bob of his Adam's apple, and felt my own throat go dry. We stood there in a silence that was both comfortable and crackling with tension. I didn't know what to say. I had created this moment, and now I had no idea how to navigate it. "How's the book?" he asked, breaking the quiet. "It's not," I admitted, looking down at my feet. The silence is louder than I expected. He was quiet for a long moment. I chanced to look at him. He was staring out at the mountains, his profile sharp against the blue sky. "Sometimes you need a different kind of noise," he said, his voice soft. "A storm. Something to shake things loose." His words were prophetic. That night, the sky broke open. The storm arrived without warning, a sudden, violent onslaught of wind and rain. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the cabin into absolute darkness. The wind howled, rattling the windows in their frames. A branch cracked and fell somewhere nearby with a heavy thud. I was completely, utterly alone in the roaring dark, and a primal fear I hadn't felt since childhood seized me. My phone had no service. The flashlight I'd seen in a drawer had dead batteries. I was fumbling around, my hands shaking, when a sudden, heavy knock sounded at the door. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. "Leo." Cole's voice cut through the sound of the storm. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. I stumbled to the door and pulled it open. He stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hair, his jacket soaked. He held up a powerful lantern, its bright beam cutting a swath through the darkness. "Figured you might not be prepared for this," he said, his expression serious. "That's the understatement of the century," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He stepped inside, bringing the light and the scent of rain and wet earth with him. The small cabin suddenly felt safer, anchored by his presence. "Got a fireplace," he stated, more than asked. "We should get it going." We worked together, our movements illuminated by the single lantern. He showed me how to open the flue, how to stack the kindling and logs for the best draw. Our hands brushed as we worked, our shoulders bumped in the small space in front of the hearth. Each touch was a small explosion in the charged air. The initial fear of the storm was being replaced by a different kind of tension, something far more potent. Soon, a fire was crackling, casting a warm, dancing glow across the room. The shadows it threw were soft and intimate. We sat on the floor, on the rug in front of the hearth, sharing a blanket he'd brought from his truck. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was only the sound of the fire and our breathing. "You were right," I said softly, staring into the flames. "About needing a storm." He didn't answer right away. I felt his gaze on me, and I turned to meet it. In the flickering firelight, his eyes seemed darker, deeper. The unreadable mask was gone. In its place was something raw and vulnerable, something that mirrored the frantic beating of my own heart. "Do you ever think about just staying?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper above the crackle of the logs. "Leaving the city behind for good." The question was so personal, so direct. It wasn't about my book, or the cabin, or the weather. It was about me, my life, my loneliness. I am thinking about it right now. The thought is so clear, so sharp, it feels like I've spoken it aloud. I am thinking that I could stay here, in this circle of firelight, with this man, forever. The intensity of the feeling scares me. It's too much, too fast. "I don't know," I finally answered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I have a life back there, a life. A sterile apartment, and a group of friends who knew a carefully curated version of me. It wasn't a life. It was a performance." Cole just nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. He seemed to understand the lie, to see straight through to the hollow truth beneath it. He shifted, and his arm, which had been resting on his knee, now rested on the blanket behind me. His fingers were inches from my shoulder. I could feel the heat of them, or maybe I was just imagining it. My entire body was a live wire, acutely aware of his proximity. The space between us was infinitesimal, yet it felt like a canyon. One of us would have to cross it, and it wouldn't be me. I was a watcher, not a doer. The air grew thick with unspoken things. The silence stretched, filled with the howl of the wind and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I couldn't take it anymore. The intensity was going to make me shatter. I should probably get some sleep," I said, the words clumsy and false. I made to stand up, to retreat to the cold, dark bedroom, to put distance between us before I did something stupid, like lean into him, like close that final, terrifying inch. I started to pull away, to disentangle myself from the blanket. "Good night, Cole." I was halfway to my feet when his voice stopped me, low and rough. It sliced through the noise of the storm and rooted me to the spot. Again. I froze, my back to him. Again? What did he mean, again? My mind scrambled, trying to make sense of the single word. Again, like the other night? Good night again. I turn. Slowly. My heart is a frantic drum against my ribs. He's standing now, the firelight carving him from the shadows. He takes one step, then another, closing the space I had tried to create. The air crackles. My breath hitches. He stops right in front of me, so close I have to tilt my head back to see his face. His expression is stripped bare of all pretense. It's just raw, naked want. You walk away, he says, his voice a low vibration that I feel in my bones. You get close. Then you get scared and you walk away. You did it by the fence. You're doing it now. My mouth opens, but no sound comes out. He's right. He sees everything. He reaches out, but he doesn't touch my face or my arm. His hand goes to the wall just beside my head, caging me in. His other hand lands on the wall on my other side. He leans in, his body not quite touching mine, but I can feel the heat of him, smell the rain and the wood smoke on his skin. His face is inches from mine. His green eyes, dark and turbulent as the storm outside, search my face. Don't walk away this time, he whispers, and the words are a plea, a command, a confession, all in one. And then he closes the final distance. His mouth meets mine. It isn't a gentle kiss. It's hungry and desperate and freighted with all the unspoken tension that has been building between us for weeks. It's the feeling of his calloused hands fisted in my shirt, the rough scrape of his stubble against my skin, the possessive pressure of his lips. It's not a test. It's a declaration. It's the storm breaking inside the cabin, inside me. I don't think. For the first time in my life, I just feel. My hands come up to grip his shoulders, holding on like he's the only solid thing in a world that has just tilted off its axis. The kiss is everything. It's right. It's honest. It's not rushed. It tastes of wood smoke and rain and a longing so profound it steals the air from my lungs. When he finally pulls back, we're both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I can feel the tremor in his hands. Leo, he breathes, and my name on his lips is a prayer. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, everything had gone completely, perfectly still. I woke to the unfamiliar weight of an arm slung over my waist and the scent of coffee. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, the fire, the kiss against the wall, the slow, tender exploration that had followed as we moved from the floor to my bed. Cole. I opened my eyes. The morning light was pale and gray, filtering through the window. The storm had passed. I turned my head slowly. Cole was gone. The arm around me was just the heavy weight of my own blanket. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, coiled in my stomach. He'd left. He'd woken up in the light of day and regretted it all. The thought was a physical pain. Of course he had. I was a mess, a temporary diversion. He was Cole, solid and real. I sat up, the cold air hitting my bare shoulders. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. The silence I had once craved now felt ominous, empty. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, my movements stiff and uncertain. I walked into the main room. He was there. He stood by the kitchen counter, his back to me, wearing his jeans from last night, but nothing else. His back was a landscape of taut muscle and smooth skin that I now knew the feel of under my hands. He was pouring hot water into 2 mugs. He hadn't left. He was making coffee. My relief was so potent it made me dizzy. I leaned against the doorframe, my legs suddenly unsteady. He must have heard me, because he turned. His hair was damp, probably from a cold wash at the sink. His face was guarded, the unreadable mask back in place. The easy intimacy of the night before had vanished with the darkness. The air was thick with morning after awkwardness. We just looked at each other for a long, silent moment. My anxiety came roaring back. What were the rules now? What did we do? He picked up one of the mugs and walked toward me. He stopped a foot away, holding it out. I took it, our fingers brushing. The jolt was still there, just as powerful as the first time, but now it was layered with memory. Morning, he said, his voice low and a little hoarse. Morning, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. I stared into my mug, unable to meet his eyes. I was terrified of what I might see there. Regret. Pity. The power's back on, he said, gesturing with his head toward the kitchen light, which was now glowing steadily. The storm was over. The excuse for our proximity was gone. Normalcy had returned, and I didn't know if we could survive it. Oh, good, I said, the words sounding hollow. Another silence stretched between us, more painful than any before it. He hadn't moved. He was just standing there, watching me. I finally forced myself to look at him. His expression was serious, his jaw tight. Leo, he started, then stopped. He took a deep breath. Last night. I'm not sorry. The three simple words broke through the wall of my anxiety like a battering ram. I'm not sorry. My eyes burned. I gave a shaky, relieved laugh that sounded suspiciously like a sob. Me neither, I whispered, and I finally, truly met his gaze. The mask was gone again. In his eyes, I saw not regret, but a mirror of my own fearful hope. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine, unguarded smile I had ever seen from him. It transformed his entire face, lighting him up from the inside. It was beautiful. Good, he said, his voice soft. That's good. The end of my stay loomed, a deadline that had once seemed impossibly far away and now felt like a guillotine. The 2 weeks after the storm were a strange, secret paradise. Cole would finish his work for the day, and his truck would appear in my driveway. We didn't talk about what we were. We just were. We cooked together, his quiet competence a perfect foil for my chaotic energy in the kitchen. We sat on the porch and watched the stars come out, his shoulder pressed against mine. We fell into my bed at night, our bodies learning each other with a language more honest than words. He was still quiet, still stoic in many ways, but he opened up to me in small, significant moments. He told me about growing up in these mountains, about the failed engagement that had sent him retreating further into his shell. And I told him about the pressure of the city, the loneliness of pretending to be someone I wasn't. With him, I didn't have to pretend. The test came on my last day. I had packed my car, the sight of my suitcases in the back seat a visceral betrayal of the life I had found here. The cabin was clean, sterile, stripped of all evidence of the past few weeks. It was just a rental property again. My stomach was in knots. I had to return the key. This was it. The end of the summer fling. He would take the key, say it was nice knowing me, and I would drive away, the silence in my car 1,000 times more deafening than the silence I had come here to find. I found him by the woodpile, his back to me. I walked up to him, the key feeling heavy and cold in my palm. Cole, I said. He turned, his face unreadable. He saw the key in my hand, and something shuddered in his eyes. Time to go, he asked, his voice flat. Yeah, I said, my own voice thick. I held out the key. Thanks for everything. He looked at the key, then back at my face. He didn't take it. He just stood there, his hands hanging loose at his sides. The silence was agonizing. This was it. The rejection I'd been bracing for. So that's it, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You just leave? I have to, I said, my heart fracturing. My lease is up. My life. Your life is what you decide it is, Leo, he cut in, taking a step closer. Is that what you want? To go back to a blank page and a sad lemon in the fridge? His words were a punch to the gut because they were true. I looked at my car, packed with the artifacts of a life I didn't want, and then I looked at him. At this quiet, steady man who had seen me more clearly than anyone ever had, who had broken through my silence and filled it with something real. What else is there? I whispered, my defenses crumbling. He closed the distance between us and took the key from my hand. But instead of pocketing it, he closed my fingers around it. Then, he reached into his own pocket and pulled out a different key, this one worn and older. He pressed it into my other palm. It was the key to his house, the main house on the property. Stay, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Don't rent. Just stay? We'll figure it out. Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back finally fell. I looked down at the 2 keys in my hands, one for the life I was leaving, and one for a future I never dared to imagine. I let the cabin key drop to the ground. Then I launched myself at him, my arms wrapping around his neck, and I kissed him, a deep, desperate kiss filled with relief and a terrifying, wonderful hope. He held me tight, his hand tangled in my hair, his body solid and real against mine. Stay, he murmured again, against my lips. Later that evening, We sat on the porch of his house, not the cabin. A mug of tea warmed my hands. My packed car sat in the driveway, a silent testament to the choice I had made. We watched the sun dip below the mountains, the same view from the cabin, but it felt different from here. It felt like home. Cole's hand found mine in the twilight, his fingers lacing through mine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The quiet between us was no longer empty or tense. It was full. It was peaceful. I had come to these mountains searching for words, for a story to tell. I thought I needed silence to find it. But I was wrong. I needed noise. I needed a storm. I needed a man who could fix a water heater and see the truth of my soul. I looked at our joined hands, at his strong, capable fingers wrapped around mine, and I knew my life was no longer a blank page. It was just beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't just observing it. I was finally, truly living it.